Hi, you're watching the Daily News Simplified with me, Ankit. In today's DNS, that is 19th of December, we are going to cover six topics. The first topic, it is on JN1 variant. As this variant, it is a variant of COVID-19 virus, and this particular variant has been responsible for spike in COVID cases in many countries. And as yesterday, Kerala registered its first case of this particular variant, and as a result, the central and state government they have issued advisories. For further, the second topic of today's discussion is on the PM-SHRI scheme. As this scheme, it was introduced in the year 2022, and the 5 and 6 union territories and their state governments they have not signed an MOU with the central government. Now, the third article is India in Arctic, because the station, that is Himadri station in Arctic region, it will function throughout the year. Now, moving on to the main related topics, and the first topic of the day is on the productivity of the parliament. And we are covering this particular topic. It is because the union government it has suspended few of the opposition MPs who were creating disruptions in the house. Now, the second topic of the day is on the issue of Naxalism, because there's an op-ed in the Hindu newspaper, and that op-ed it signifies that the decentralized governance it is the best way forward in order to deal with the menace of Naxalism. Hence, we'll cover in detail the left-wing extremism in the country, because this is a recurring topic in the UPSC exam. Follow the third important article of the day is on the National Green Tribunal. And this particular body is in news because it has directed the state government of Tamil Nadu to deal with the oil spill in the nearby region. Hence, before moving forward, let me also remind you to like this video, share this video with your fellow aspirants, as well as hit the subscribe button in case you want to stay updated of our future videos. Hence, let us start our today's discussion with these first articles of the day, and it appeared in both Indian Express as well as the Hindu newspaper. Now, as you can see from this report, there's a new COVID variant which is known as JN1 variant. And this particular variant, it is an offshoot of a Omicron variant which was prevalent before. Now, what are these variants? Now, as we know, a virus in its original form, it tries to multiply itself. And if there are errors in the multiplication process, it is called as a mutation of virus. Now, this particular variant, that is JN1 variant, it is categorized as a variant of interest by the World Health Organization. Now, you'll ask which type of a variant are categorized as this variant of interest. Now, if a particular variant of a virus, it is more potent and it makes the antibodies or vaccines less effective in nature, then it is called a variant of interest. While its more severe form, it is called a variant of concern. And a variant of a concern is a particular variant which might result into increased transmission, severe disease, which might lead even to hospitalization of patients, and it further reduces the effectiveness of vaccines much more than variant of interest. Hence, this JN1 variant, it is currently categorized as a variant of interest. Now, how is this mutation takes place? As I already highlighted, these mutations, they are a natural process of a particular virus. And in a natural process, this virus, it tries to multiply itself. But when there are errors in the multiplication process, it leads to mutation. Now, this particular mutation, it can either make the virus neutral, which means the virus will have a same efficacy, or it can also make the virus more potent in nature. And as you can see, the variants such as alpha, beta, or delta variants of COVID virus, they were more potent than the original virus strain. Also, these virus, they can have less potency or these mutations, they can have less potency than the parent virus. Hence, mutations, it can either increase the potency, make it an equal potency, which means they are neutral, or it can also reduce the potency of a particular virus. Now, this mutation process, it helps virus to move from one host to another in a much more effective manner. Further, it also allows these viruses to undertake faster reproduction. And also, these mutations, it makes these viruses adhere to the host surface in a much more better manner. Also, these mutations are such that it might also help these viruses to evade our immune system as well as our vaccines. Now, let us deal with this model question. And why are we dealing with this particular model question? Because the same theme of bacteria, fungi, or virus, it was asked in the prelims of the year 2016. So, let us consider this model question. And the first statement, it says that the mutations are errors in the replication of virus genetic code. Now, I've already highlighted that a natural process of a virus, it allows the virus to replicate itself. And if there are errors in the replication process, it leads to mutation. Hence, the first statement is a correct statement. The second statement, the virus, it can mutate to adhere better to the surfaces of host cell. Now, as you can see from this characteristic, it leads to better adherence to host surface. Thereby, second statement also is a correct statement. The third statement, it says that some mutations, they could make virus less infectious. As I've already highlighted, mutations, they can either make virus more infectious or have a similar infectious level, or it might also lead to less infectious virus. Hence, this third statement is also correct. Thereby, here option C is the correct answer. Now, whereas this PYQ is concerned, here option D was the correct answer. Now, let us move to the second article of the day, which appeared on page 7 of the Indian Express newspaper. Now, this particular news article, it highlights that 6 states and union territories, they are yet to sign a memorandum of understanding for implementing the PM-SHRI scheme. Now, UPSC, it has a particular interest with the government scheme, and especially the schemes which are related to educational sector. It was asked before by the UPSC itself. Hence, let us first understand what is this PM-SHRI scheme, and then we'll move to our model question. Now, this PM Schools for Rising India scheme, which is abbreviated as PM-SHRI scheme, it is a centrally sponsored scheme, which means that the contribution of finances for implementation of this scheme, it is done by both central as well as state governments in a 60 to 40 ratio in case of normal states, or in case of northeastern or Himalayan state, it is 90 to 10 ratio. Now, this particular scheme, it wants to develop more than 14,500 schools which are managed by governments at different level, be it central government, state government, or local governments. The key area of interest is that it aims to develop the existing schools and it does not want to create new schools. And what are the features of this particular scheme? For example, this scheme, it wants to provide high quality education in schools, and it also wants to make these schools green schools, which means that these schools will have features to reduce the environmental burden on the environment. Further, this scheme, it also provides for an inquiry driven learner centric model, which means the pedagogy which will be adopted in this school will be more experimental, more holistic, integrated, as well as foundational in nature. Also, these schools, they will provide linkages with skill sector or sector skill councils, as it will enable the students to get employed in a much more effective manner when they are educated with different level of skillings. Further, this scheme, it also provides for a school quality assessment framework. And this particular framework, it is it will act as a performance indicator of a particular school. Now, which kind of a school is eligible for benefits under this scheme? Now, the schools who have a UDI SE plus coding, then they will be eligible for these particular schemes. And this scheme, it will be implemented at maximum 2 schools in a particular block. Further, the geotagging of these schools, it will also be done by the Bhaskaracharya National Institute for Space Application and Geoinformatics, which is known as BISAGN. Now let us deal with the model question. And again, I'll highlight the importance of this particular scheme. It is because a question on Vidyanjali Yojana, it was asked by UPSC in the year 2017. So on similar lines, we have curated a practice question on PM-SHRI scheme. Let us consider the first statement. This statement, it states that the scheme, it aims to provide high quality school infrastructure in the northeastern states of India. Now this particular statement is incorrect because it wants to provide high quality school infrastructure, but it wants to provide this scheme in the entire country and not just in northeastern state. Hence this first statement is incorrect. Now the second statement, it states that any elementary school under the center and state governments would be considered for selection under this scheme. Now it is not any elementary school, but rather schools who only have this UDISA plus ranking, then they'll be eligible for this particular scheme. Hence this second statement also is incorrect. The third statement, it states that the scheme included geotagging of schools for monitoring of PM-SHRI. This statement, as I've already highlighted, is a true statement because this geotagging activity will be achieved with the help of BISAG and organization. Hence, this third statement is a correct statement. Thereby, how many of the above given statements are incorrect? Thereby, option B is the correct answer. Whereas the answer to this PYQ, it is option A. Now let us move to the third article of the day, which appeared in both the Indian Express and the Hindu newspaper. Now this particular article, it highlights that India's first Arctic Research Center, that was Himadri, it will function throughout the year as against a limited period of time, that was 180 days currently. Now India, it is attracted towards this Arctic region for many purposes, which we'll deal with on later. But India's first presence in this Arctic region was in the year of 2007. Because India, it sent its first expedition in the Arctic region and it comprised of 5 scientists. Now India's first base, that was Himadri, it was established in the year of 2008. And this particular station, it operated for about 180 days every year. And from 2008 to current year, more than 400 scientists, they have visited this particular station. Now, why is India attracted towards polar region, especially Arctic as well as Antarctica? It is because this region, it hosts pristine environment which consists not just of atmospheric phenomena but also oceanic as well as biological phenomena. And recently, with onset of climate change, the entire global attention towards these polar regions, they have increased because climate change, it manifests itself in these polar regions in form of melting of ice. And scientists from different countries, they want to estimate how much ice is melting every year to estimate the exact amount of climate change that is happening currently. Hence, you can see not just every other country, but also India, especially through its Himadri station in the Arctic, as well as Dakshin Gangotri, Maitri and Bharati stations, which are located in Antarctica, it is interested in these polar regions. Now, this Dakshin Gangotri station, which was established in Antarctica, it has now submerged under ice. And India has currently two stations that are Maitri as well as Bharti. Now let us consider the model question and why are we dealing with questions on Arctic and Antarctica? Because a question on Arctic Council, it appeared in the prelims of the year 2014. So polar region has been a specific area of interest for UPSC, and thereby we have also curated a practice question on this same region. The first statement, it states that the Maitri and Bharti are research stations in the Arctic region, which we know from our previous slide is an incorrect statement because these are the stations are located in Antarctica. Further, the second statement, it says that the Dakshin Gangotri in Antarctica is now submerged under ice, which again is a correct statement. As India, it currently has only two working stations, that are Maitri and Bharti in the Antarctica region. Further, the third statement, Himadri, it will operate in summers only, which again is an incorrect statement because the news article again, it highlights that the Himadri station, it will work throughout the year and not just in summer months. Hence, the correct answer to this model question is option A. Whereas the answer to this PYQ, it was option D, as Denmark, Russia and United States are the members of Arctic Council. Now let us move to the main centric article of today's DNS. And the first article that we have taken, it appeared in both the Indian Express and the Hindu newspaper. And the Hindu newspaper and its editorial section in particular, it deals with the issue that the legislative process in the country, it is in decline. Now, why is these legislative process in decline? Because from these news articles, which frequently appear in newspaper and not just today, they highlight that the MPs, both from the ruling party as well as the opposition benches, they disrupt the House and its proceedings frequently. Now, this particular disruption, it's not just a phenomena of 17th Lok Sabha, which is the current Lok Sabha, but this has taken place in the past as well. And this highlights that the political stakeholders in the country, especially these MPs, they resort to sloganeering, protest in order to disrupt the functioning of this house. And why are we dealing with this particular news article? It is because UPSC GS paper 2, it deals with the issues, structures, functioning and conduct of businesses and issues arising out of this, especially with relation to functioning of parliament as well as state legislatures. Further, a question, especially in the mains of the year 2019, it highlighted that individuals' parliamentarian role, it is on decline and which has impacted the quality of debates and their outcomes. Hence, you can see the productivity of the parliament, it is important from UPSC mains point of view. Now, what are the functions of parliament? First, let us understand this in order to understand why is the disruption affecting this functioning itself. Now, the parliament, it has many functions, and the most important parliamentary function is to make laws in the country. As this legislative function, it is the primary function of a legislative body, especially the parliament as well as state legislature. Now let us consider how parliament make laws. Now there's this seventh schedule in the Indian constitution, which provides for union, concurrent as well as state list. Now in normal circumstances, Parliament of India, it can legislate on issues which are there on union list as well as concurrent list. However, even in special circumstances, Parliament can also legislate on the state issues that are there in state list. For example, under Article 249, if the Rajya Sabha and it passes a resolution with a special majority, then the Parliament of India, it can pass any laws which are related to matters listed on the state subject. Further, under Article 356, if there's a precedent rule in the state, then the Parliament of India, it becomes eligible to pass laws which are there on the state list for that particular state itself. Hence, you can see Parliament, it has a primary role of making laws on union and concurrent list, and in special circumstances also on the state list. Now, Parliament, it also discharges an important function, which is there to scrutinize the activities of the government. Because legislature, it deals with accountability of executive. And how is this accountability upheld by the Parliament? It is through the scrutinizing of the government's activity. For example, as per Article 75, subsection 3 of the Constitution, the Council of Ministers, they are responsible to the legislature. Hence, it means if the legislature, it passes a non-confidence motion, then it can unseat the present government. Further, Parliament, it also utilizes several devices such as confidence motion, adjournment motion, cut motion, censor motion, and debates which enable the Parliament to scrutinize the activities of the government. Hence, you can see it ensures the accountability of executive, and it is also an important role of the Indian Parliament. Now, the third important function that the Parliament discharges is that it controls the finances of the government. Now, any union government, it cannot spend the money out of public exchequer on its own volition. Rather, it has to pass what is known as annual financial statement, which is commonly known as a budget. Now, these budgets, they have details on what kind of taxes will be implemented and what kind of the areas that the government will spend money on. And this annual financial statement, it can only be implemented after it is passed by the Parliament. Further, spendings by the government, it is scrutinized by parliamentary committee, especially the Public Accounts Committee as well as Estimates Committee. And also the accounts of the union government, it is scrutinized by CAG, that is Comptroller and Auditor General, who presents his report to the Parliament itself. And then Parliament, it can debate over whether the executive is judiciously spending the public money. Hence, you can see through use of control over budget, Parliament, it exercises control over finances. Further, Parliament, it also demonstrates what is known as a constituent role. For example, there is an Indian constitution, and who can amend this constitution? It can only be amended after they are introduced in the Parliament. And this signifies that the Parliament, it has a constituent role, that is amending the Constitution of India. Further, Parliament, it also discharges several electoral functions. For examples, members who are elected to offices such as President, Vice President, they are elected by the Parliament itself. Further, Parliament also exhibits judicial functions, as again, it can impeach office holders of President as well as members of Supreme Court and High Court, and also it can remove the members of Public Service Commission, both of union as well as state level. Hence, you can see Parliament, it has a key judicial role over removal of office of key constitutional holders, that are President, members of the higher judiciary, members of the Public Service Commission, as well as the Comptroller and Auditor General. Hence, to discharge all these activities in a more effective manner, the Parliament, it needs to function properly. But is Indian Parliament functioning properly in the current context? The answer, obviously, as you can understand from our today's news article, it is that the Parliament, it is unable to discharge its function because of the frequent disruptions. Now, I also have few arguments that will support my hypothesis that the productivity of the parliament in India is currently declining. For example, in terms of bills passed by the parliament, you can see that this number has continuously declined over the last 3 years. For example, in the 15th Lok Sabha that was in function from 2009 to 2014, almost 250 bills were passed. Whereas this number, it reduced substantially in the 16th Lok Sabha, which witnessed passage of only 205 bills throughout its entire duration of 5 years. Whereas the current Lok Sabha, that is 17th Lok Sabha, it has only witnessed 131 bills currently. And there's only about 6 months time left in the duration of this Lok Sabha. Hence, you can see that the numbers of bills passed by the Indian Parliament in successive Lok Sabha, it has declined. And this decline, it is a continuous trend, not just from 15th, but also from 13th Lok Sabha, which is very much clear from this graph. Further, in terms of number of sitting, we can also see that there is a continuous decline in the sittings as well. As you can see, in the early time, that was the early decades of 1950s, Parliament, it sat for almost 155 to 160 days every particular year. However, currently, it has declined to less than 80 days in the current situation. And further, in the entire 17th Lok Sabha, which is the current Lok Sabha, the Parliament, it has only functioned for 230 days. And this 230 days is almost for the span of 4.5 years of the current Lok Sabha. Hence, you can see, even in terms of number of sitting days, the amount of sitting days, it has reduced substantially, and it has almost reduced half. Further, you can also see that the numbers of private member bills, which are bills passed by MPs outside the government, it has also reduced substantially. For example, almost 14 private member bills, they were passed in the 15th Lok Sabha, and this reduced to only 2 private member bills in the 16th Lok Sabha. Further, in terms of questionnaire, which is very much important to ask questions from the government, the functioning of this questionnaire, it has also substantially disrupted in the parliament. For example, total amount of time that is allocated for this questionnaire, 29% of this time, it was disrupted in the 16th Lok Sabha. Whereas in the 17th, that is current Lok Sabha, this scheduled amount of time for questionnaire, it reduced by 48% because of the frequent disruptions. Hence, you can see, even in terms of holding the executive accountable through use of questionnaire, this time has also been disrupted frequently. Hence, the primary role of the legislature, not just by passing of bills, but also to ensure the accountability of the executive, it has also reduced substantially. And how is this happening? Because the discipline and decorum of members of the house, it has reduced substantially. And because of this lack of discipline and decorum among the members, what we see is that there is a significant decline in the quality of legislation passed, and also in the decline in the quality of debates around the key issues. Because parliamentarians, they essentially toe their party lines, which enable them to argue more on rhetorics rather than on facts. And in the times of social media and live demonstration, this particular antic, especially on reliance on rhetoric, it has been frequently resorted by the parliamentarians. And this in general has declined the quality of legislation passed and also reduced the quality of debates that are essential for the functioning of the house. Now, what are the reasons of this declining productivity? The first important reason is that there's an increased polarization in the political atmosphere in the country. As both the ruling party as well as the opposition, they frequently rely on protest sloganeering and walkouts. And this prevents the smooth functioning of the House. And this polarization, it has resulted into increased confrontation in the Indian legislature. And as you can see from our today's article, what the government or the ruling party wants to do is that it wants to reduce this confrontation through increasingly suspending the disruptive MPs. The first issue is that some MPs, they are creating disruption in the House, and the second issue is that the government is resorting to suspension of MPs rather than achieving a consensus on important decisions. And this highlights that the polarization has increased substantially. Further, MPs in the country, especially the government MPs, they have inadequate time to prepare their bills, which means whatever bills they introduce in the House, they are not adequate in nature, especially leading to inadequate scrutiny and lack of oversight. And when these lack of prepared bills are introduced in the House, it leads to delays and controversies, which further increases the polarization in the Indian politics. Now, also, what results into less utilization of committees. Now, there are parliamentary committees which enable these committees to detailedly scrutinize any piece of legislation. But if the government feels that these parliamentary committees, they are also getting polarized in terms of party lines, then what government wants to do is that it is apprehensive to send these bills for consideration of these committees. And as you can see from this particular graph, the percentage of bills that are referred to parliamentary committees, it has also substantially declined in the past 3 Lok Sabhas. Now, these committees, they were earlier seen as a vestige of parliamentary governance, because these committees, they operate away from public scrutiny. Hence, it enabled the members of this committee to reach a consensus on a particular issue. But rather, currently what we see that the functioning of this committee, it has also become polarized, because particular members, they rather to party line rather than the interest of their population. Hence, the functioning of these committees, they are also prone to politicization, which means that the government is apprehensive of sending bills to these committees. Further, what we see that the parliament or representation in the parliament, it lacks diversity, because in general what we see that the parliamentarians, they are mostly represented of the dominant section, whereas the marginalized section, especially women or members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they are inadequately represented in the parliament. And it means that when there's a lack of diversity in the House, it might lead to exclusion of diverse voices and their respective opinions. And hence, any legislation which is passed by a lack of diverse House, it might go against the interest of these marginalized communities. Further, there's also a reason for decline, and this is because the influence of Raj Sabha in the legislative process, it has declined substantially. Now, what this Raj Sabha was originally intended to do was that this Raj Sabha, it aimed to check the hasty legislations of the Lok Sabha, and the members of Raj Sabha, who usually are from a selected political and professional background, they can provide a much more effective debate as well as scrutiny of any bills. However, recently, many of the bills by the government, they are aimed to reduce the use of this Raj Sabha, especially when the government, it utilizes the money bill provisions on a particular legislation. And if a particular legislation, it is made as a money bill, then the Raj Sabha, it has to pass this particular bill in the span of just 14 days, and the amendment which might be suggested by Raj Sabha, it is not binding on the Lok Sabha. And this we saw with passage of Aadhaar bill, because this Aadhaar bill, it was made into a money bill which allowed this Aadhaar bill to pass through Rajya Sabha in a less effective manner. Hence, the productivity of the parliament it has declined because of increased political polarization, inadequate preparation by the MPs, which leads to more and more controversies in the House, less utilization of parliamentary committee, lack of diversity in the representation of the House, and also declining influence of the Rajya Sabha. Now, what should be the way forward in order to increase the productivity of the parliament? And the first suggestion, it came from National Committee for Reforms in the Constitution, which was established in the year of 2002. Now, this particular committee that assessed the working of the Indian Constitution, it suggested that the Parliament it should have a certain amount of or a minimum amount of sittings every particular year. And in this regard, this committee suggested that the Lok Sabha it should sit for about 120 days particular every year, whereas Raj Sabha it should function for 100 days every year. And if there's a increased or a minimum amount of sitting of the house, it will enable the both the houses to function in an effective manner. Further, what we also need to do is that the political stakeholders in the country they should engage in constructive politics, because rather than serving their own agenda, what the politicians in the country they should focus more on achieving a consensus based politics. Because if there's a disagreement over a certain provision of a particular bill, then that particular provision it can be sorted out with the achieving of consensus among all stakeholders. Further, what is required is that the bills they should be scrutinized in a much more better manner, and this can happen in two stages. First is the pre-introduction stage, where the government of the day it can use technology to sort inputs of public, and this inputs it will enable the government to frame any provision in a better manner. Further, this sorting of inputs from the public it will also give a sanction or a public sanction to any provision which will make it difficult for the opposition MPs to disrupt the function of the house. Further, this scrutiny of bills it can also be done in post introduction stage if it is made mandatory to refer to this bill to the parliamentary committees, because these committees they were able to scrutinize the bill in a much more effective as well as detailed manner. Hence, when every bill is scrutinized in an effective manner, it will reduce the amount of disruption that usually occurs in the house. Further, what the government or what the Parliament of India it should do is that it should focus on increasing the capacity building of the legislators, because these legislators they are generalist in nature, which makes it difficult for them to analyze a particular legal or technical provision which might appear in a particular bill. Thereby, with increased capacity building training, this it will enable the members of the legislature to discharge their role in a much more effective manner. Particularly, it will help these MPs understand their key role, that is to provide a detailed scrutiny of a bill if you are a opposition MP. Hence, through use of or minimum increased sittings, relying more on constructive politics, especially with aim to achieve consensus, scrutinizing the bills in a much more better manner, both in pre-introduction as well as post-introduction state, through use of technology and capacity building of the existing legislator, it will enable the parliament to increase its productivity, because this particular productivity it is very much important for effective functioning of the legislative organ of the Indian state. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on our first mains article, and with this let us move to the second article, that is on Maoism. Now, this particular topic, that is Naxalism, which is another name for left wing extremism in the country, it is a particular area of interest for UPSC because a question, it appeared as recently as in mains of the year 2022, and it also appeared in the mains of the year 2018. As these two questions, they were designed to ask students what are the government measures in order to control the menace of left wing extremism in the country. Further, this 2022 question, it also asked students to suggest a multi-layered strategy to tackle this particular menace. Further, UPSC in its GS Paper 3 syllabus, it specifically highlights linkages between development and spread of extremism and lack of development in red corridor of the country. It has resulted into increasing Naxalism or left-wing extremism. Now, what are the cause of this left-wing extremism? Let us understand this in the next slide. Now, the first cause which might perpetrate this left-wing extremism or Naxalism, it is related to land-related factors. Because earlier, Indian government, it implemented what was known as land reforms. As this land reforms, they were intended to provide land to majority of the people in the country. And what it wanted to do was that it wanted to implement land ceiling laws. As these land ceiling laws, they were designed to distribute the land towards a more and more people. However, the implementation of these land reform measures, it was not done in an effective manner. And what it led to that these land ceiling regulations, they were evaded by the powerful sections of the society. And the land which was meant for poor and the marginalized, they were not given to them. Further, government, it also enabled Forest Rights Act, which prohibited the transfer of non-tribal land to tribals. Tribal land to non-tribal. However, the implementation of this Forest Rights Act, it is also not done in an effective manner, which enabled the tribals to sell their land to non-tribals. Also, the public lands that are land owned by governments, especially in the less developed areas of the country, they are encroached by the powerful sections of the community. And what it resulted into increased displacement of the marginalized from their entitled land. And when these tribals, they were marginalized or displaced from their own land, especially when it was encroached by powerful section, or when government itself, it took land for development purposes. Hence, due to exclusion from the land, it led to displacement of the tribals from their own land. And it forced them to, and it reduced the amount of measures that they can take to fulfill their livelihood needs. Because most tribals, they are dependent on agriculture as well as forest produce to gain employment and also to meet their livelihood needs. But when due to land and displacement factors, these tribals, they were evicted from their parent land, which made them unable to use these measures in order to fulfill their livelihood need. Hence, they were unable to secure minor forest produce or grow a crop on their own community based lands. And all these three factors, it culminated into increased exclusion of tribals from the Indian society. As earlier, these tribals, they were subjected to inhuman practices, especially untouchability. And when they had their own land, they were at least able to meet their livelihood needs. However, due to land reforms or its inability to be implemented properly or displacement of their land by powerful section or by the government, it led to their exclusion from the society itself. Further, there are also many governance related factors which increased or it led to spread of Naxalism in India. For example, Many of the government schemes that wants to provide betterment for the tribals, such as PDS scheme, they were not implemented properly due to increased corruption. Hence, the measures that the government originally intended to take to support the livelihood and exclusion of or inclusion of these tribals, it was these schemes they were not implemented properly because of increased corruption. Further, these measures they were implemented by officials who are either corrupt or poorly motivated. Hence, the implementation of the scheme they were also not done effectively. And further, the divide at the house or divide between tribals and not tribals, it was utilized or misutilized by these Naxals themselves, which created the amount of anger or it aggravated the amount of anger that exists in the eyes of tribals with respect to the government. And hence, what it led to that these tribals they resorted to violence in order to meet their land displacement and their livelihood need. And this was the key factor or key role that the Naxals in the country they utilized in order to further their left-wing extremism. Now, to address the root cause of this Naxalism, what the government has done, it has undertaken few measures which we'll understand in the next slide. But let us first understand the current status of the left-wing extremism in the country. Now, the current status is that there has been a significant improvement in the security infrastructure and security status of the left wing infrastructure. Because you can see from this graph, the left wing violence in general, it has gone down significantly in terms of incidents or in terms of death due to left wing extremism. The country has witnessed about 77% and 85% decline. Further, the amount of districts that are affected by left-wing extremism, it has also decreased by 52% from 96 to 46 in the span of 11 years. So you can understand that the geographical spread of the left-wing extremism movement, it is shrinking in a rapid manner. And currently, only 25 districts in the country, they are categorized as most affected due to this menace. Hence, you can see that the red corridor, which earlier extended to more than 100 districts in the country, it has rapidly reduced to just 46 in the current status. And this particular improvement has been due to government's policy. And this policy it can be categorized under the umbrella scheme of National Policy and Action Plan, which is abbreviated as NPAP. And this action plan it was introduced in the year 2015. Now, this particular action plan it deals with two aspects. The first is that it wants to increase the capacity of the security forces of India, both central and state governments, in order to make them better equipped to deal with the left wing extremism. Further, the government it has also taken infrastructure as well as social development in order to reduce the exclusion of the tribals in the country. Now, let us first understand what the government has done in order to increase the capacity of the security forces. Now, Indian government, that is the central government, it implemented a sub scheme for modernization of police forces. And through this scheme, what the government did was that it strengthened the capacity by providing the security forces with latest equipments. Further, it also strengthened the police infrastructure, especially it created new police stations in the left-wing extremism areas, and it also made the existing infrastructure more strengthened in order to take the attacks of these Maoists. Further, government it also implemented certain institutional measures. For example, specialized security forces, especially Black Panther Combat Force of Chhattisgarh were created, which was on the same lines as Greyhounds of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, as this particular institution or security force, it was trained in a specific manner in order to deal or in order to counter the attacks of left wing extremists. Further, union government it also created a special vertical under the National Investigating Agency. As this particular vertical, it investigated important cases related to left wing extremism. Further, government it has also worked upon increased coordination between security forces, that is central armed police forces, as well as state police and intelligence services, which will enable them to share the information in a much more effective manner. Also, the most important aspect of this national policy of action plan is the amount of infrastructure development that the Indian government took. For example, Indian government it approved more than 17,000 kilometer worth of roads which will be constructed in these left wing affected areas. Further, government it also focused on improving telecom connectivity in this particular area, and this was done through construction or establishment of more about 5,000 mobile towers in the region. Because with mobile towers, what the government was able to do, that it provided these areas with 4G connectivity, which opened many educational as well as economic avenues for the tribal population. Also, government it focused on financial inclusion, and this was done through opening of Jan Dhan bank account or establishment of new bank branches as well as ATM in these regions. Further, government it also focused on increasing the skill levels of the tribal population, and this was done through Roshni initiative, which provided these or rural youth or tribal youth with training and placement, and this was done in 27 left wing extremism districts. Further, government it also undertook establishment of new industrial training institutes as well as skill development centers which provided skill training for the tribal and rural youth. Further, any person who was involved in left wing extremist activities, they were encouraged to surrender and rehabilitate with the union and state governments, as they were provided, or the cadres of LWE organizations, they were provided with a fixed deposits of 2.5 lakhs as well as 1.5 lakhs depending upon their hierarchical organization. Hence, you can see through modernization of police forces and institutional measures, the government it strengthened the capacity of the security forces, which make them more effective in dealing with the violence. Whereas to reduce this violence, what the government did was that it provided these regions with economic as well as educational avenues, especially with infrastructure development, skill training, as well as encouraging the cadres to surrender and rehabilitate it themselves. And this is the key aspect that the government focused on in order to reduce the menace of left wing extremism. And from the previous slide, you can see that there has been a significant improvement in the security situation of the country. But there are several issues that are currently plaguing and which has resulted not in elimination of this particular menace. And the first issue is that the organizational strength of the Maoism it is not reducing, because these Maoists they appeal to the ideology of the poor, and they antagonize these poor to act against the state or the security apparatus of the country. And what these recruits are promised, that these left wing organizations they will provide both financial as well as social security to the youth. Further, they promise them with dignity and empowerment, which makes these persons act in a violent manner against the security apparatus. Further, what we can also see, that the funding sources of these left wing organizations, they are not tackled upon in an effective manner, because these left wing organizations, they frequently rely on taxes and levies from the adjoining areas. And these taxes and levies, they are collected in a manner of extortion from local businesses as well as local population. Hence, you can see that these left wing organizations, they are provided with the continuous funding sources through this extortion activities. Further, these left wing extremist organizations, they also control the forest economy of the particular region. Hence, whatever minor forest produce that particular region produces, these left wing organizations, they sell them in market, and which enables them to provide for continuous funding of their illegal activities. And the government responses has also been some kind of adequate, because currently there are multiple security organizations that are functioning in the house, and these multiple security organizations, they come under control of union as well as different state governments. And naturally, when there are multiple security organizations who are responsible to control the menace, it leads to lack of coordination. Further, this left wing extremist areas, it is spread across many states, and hence when police organization of a particular state it acts against these extremists, they move to different state, thereby evading the arrest completely. And in absence of proper coordination, they further evade the law and order situation in the country. Also, the security responses, especially that of security organization, it also suffers substantially, because from frequent news reports you might see that there is a negligence of established standards of procedure, and it sometimes leads to loss of life of these security personnel. Further, these security agencies, they also face structural deficiencies, because especially the central armed police forces, they are manned by officers from the Indian police service. However, this Indian police service officers, they serve this particular organization only on basis of deputation and for a particular time frame, and this prevents them to achieve high level of socialization as well as experience in order to deal with a particular menace which is there in the jungles of the country. And this sluggish capacity of police forces, especially in form of structural deficiency as well as lack of vacancies, it has led to inadequate security response from the Indian state itself. Hence, naturally, what should be the suggestions in order to further strengthen our capacity by dealing with this Naxalism in a more effective manner? Let us look at this in the next slide. Now, the first process that the government should focus on, and that it already focuses on, is it should try to reduce the alienation of these tribals. And it should do that in many different ways. The first is that the government should increase the focus on building roads as well as provide these areas with telecom as well as public transport community connectivity. And when these particular infrastructure development take place, it will enable the people of this region to travel to different places. And then these people, they realize what they are missing out on, especially with related to economic development. Further, there's an existing trust deficit between the tribals as well as the Indian state apparatus. And this trust deficit, it is misutilized by the Naxals to create a movement against the Indian state. And hence, government should focus on bridging this trust deficit. And how should government bridge this trust deficit? It should also take the help of local NGOs, as these NGOs, they're aware of the existing local situation, and they will help bridge this trust deficit that currently exists between government as well as the tribals. Further, the schemes that are there for benefits of the tribals, the awareness of this scheme, it should be spread through multiple avenues. For example, government should take a coordinated media effort as well as interact with these tribals in order to increase the awareness of a particular scheme. Further, special efforts they should be made in direction to provide financial empowerment to the local population, and this can be done in form of providing them with bank credits and form of loans which will enable them to establish their own entrepreneurial activities. Further, women of the region, they can be provided or they can be incorporated in special or self-help groups which will enable them to organize their resources in a much more effective manner. Further, in order to introduce or improve the implementation of various projects, what the governments at both central and state government, they should ensure the exercise of cooperative federalism, because any particular response against this left wing extremism, it requires a proper coordinated effort between different states as well as different level of governments, and this can be done through a proper cooperative federalism architecture, as this will enable the government to take a more coordinated security related approach as well as undertake the infrastructure development in a much more planned and an effective manner. Hence, you can see that the government it is currently following a two-pronged policy. The first is that it is dealing this menace from a security point of view, which means that the government is focusing on increasing the security capacity of the Indian state. Further, it is also witnessing this problem from the lack of development perspective. Hence, the Indian governments, both central and state level, they are involved in conducting activities, especially with relation to infrastructure development, skill training, as well as providing educational as well as financial opportunities to the local population. And this two pronged approach has paid rich dividends. Hence, the current situation, it should focus more on increasing the implementation of these two measures in order to eliminate this particular problem once in for all. Hence, this is all for today's discussion on our second topic, that is Naxalism. And with this, let us move to the third topic of the day, which is the National Green Tribunal. Now, this particular news article, it appeared in today's newspaper because NGT has questioned the state government of Tamil Nadu on how the oil spill which has taken place and how it reached the Pulicat Lake. Now, this particular body, that is National Green Tribunal, it is important from UPSC perspective. Why? Because UPSC in GS paper 2 syllabus, it highlights statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies. Further, a question in the mains of the year 2019, it appeared on Central Administration Tribunal, and hence you can see that these quasi-judicial bodies, especially the tribunals, are a key area of interest for UPSC. Now, the Union government, it passed National Green Tribunals Act in the year 2010. Hence, you can see that this National Green Tribunal is a statutory body, because this body was established through a statute that was passed by the Parliament. Now, this particular act, it forms the NGT, and it composes or it comprises of chairperson, who is usually a retired Supreme Court judge or a retired Chief Justice of a particular High Court. And this body, it can also consist of judicial members, that are between 10 to 20 judicial members who are retired judges of the High Court. Further, it also consists of 10 to 20 expert members. Hence, you can see that the composition of this National Green Tribunal, it consists of chairperson, judicials, as well as expert members. And there are various benches that is comprised to hear the cases which are there for environment related matters. Now, this particular body, it is a quasi-judicial body, and hence this National Green Tribunals, it has a power of a civil court, which means that the order, it has a degree of a civil court, and the orders of National Green Tribunal, it can be appealed towards Supreme Court within a period of usually 90 days. Now, this tribunal, it is not bound by Code of Civil Procedure or by Evidence Act of the year 1872. Rather, this body deals with principles of natural justice. Hence, you can see when the body, it feels that the principles of natural justice is violated, and this body does not care about codes or evidences. Further, this body, it passes order to provide for relief and compensation in case of victims of air pollution or different environmental damage. Further, this NGT, it can also give orders to ensure restitution of not just property damage but also that of surroundings. Now, what are the laws that this particular tribunal deals with? Now, from this screenshot, you can see that it deals with implementation of these 7 laws. But what is more important, that 2 important laws in the country, that is Wildlife Protection Act of the year 1972 as well as recognition of Forest Rights Act of the year 2006, they are not considered by the National Green Tribunal. Hence, you can see its jurisdiction, particularly with respect to Wildlife Protection Act as well as Forest Rights Act, it is not there. And this can be a key area of interest for the UPSC in terms of prelims. So, candidates, I expect you to know that the NGT, it can only enforce the implementation of these 7 laws, and it cannot enforce the implementation of these 2 laws. Further, what are the achievements of this National Green Tribunal? First of all, that this tribunal, it ensures speedy justice in case of environmental damage. Now let us look at the case disposal by this particular body in the last 5 years. From this you can see that the tribunals, it received more than 15,000 cases in the last 5 years, and it disposed of more than 16,000 cases. So you can see not just it provides speedy justice, but this tribunal, it is also able to reduce the pendency before it through increased disposal of cases. Further, this particular tribunal, it has also undertaken few initiatives which are administrative or procedural in nature. For example, it uses video conferencing for speedy disposal of cases, and it also launched a special initiative for disposal of cases which are there for more than 5 years. Further, the NGT, it has also undertaken steps to increase the effectiveness of court management. Further, NGT, it can also take suo motu cognizance of various interventions. However, it must also be noted that this body, it is not involved in an activism form of justice delivery. Rather, it relies on definite data when it takes suo motu interventions. For example, the polluted river stretches, the body, it took suo motu cognizance for more than 351 polluted river stretches, and it was done based on an online data of water quality which was maintained by CPCB. Further, this NGT, it also took suo motu cognizance of industrial area pollution, and this was done based on the Comprehensive Environmental Pollution Index, which was again launched by CPCB. Further, it also undertook special actions to combat the rise in air pollution, and this was done through an online data. Hence, you can see that the body it is involved in evidence-based environmental jurisdiction rather than activism. And these particular examples, for examples, providing speedy justice, undertaking administrative initiatives in order to dispose the cases in much more effective manner, and taking suo motu cognizance, especially when there is an evidence against a particular problem, it has furthered the case of environmental justice in our Indian country. Further, NGT it also involves and it also gives technical judgments which forms the basis of effective environmental pollution combat. Further, the environmental justice that are furthered by NGT, it also created a new breed of environmental specialist lawyers. Hence, you can see that this NGT it has been able to effectively address the cases of environmental pollution in the country. Most importantly, in the year of 2016, it gave a judgment against Art of Living Foundation when this foundation it was involved in violating of environmental laws in the Delhi's Yamuna floodplain. Further, in the year of 2015, this NGT it imposed a tax on diesel engines, whereas in the year of 2022, this body it directed the state of Tamil Nadu to notify the Tamil Nadu Wetland Mission. Hence, you can see not just protecting the environment of the country, it also imposes significant fine on violating the environmental norms in the country. Because this Art of Living Foundation, it was given a fine of 5 crore rupees for violating the environmental norms. But however, there are several issues that are associated in the functioning of National Green Tribunal. The first issue is that this body, that is National Green Tribunal, it lacks the power to make its order comply with different bodies. For example, most landmark orders by this National Green Tribunal, especially with relation to River Ganga pollution as well as Delhi air pollution, it remains unimplemented because this body does not have the power to make organization comply with its orders. Further, the NGT it also faces several vacancies because in the past 9 years, this NGT it does not even have the minimum requirement of 10 judicial as well as expert members. Hence, you can see with increased vacancies, the effectiveness of NGT as it is not able to take up cases in a much more effective manner. Further, this body it gives orders which might be generic in nature because since July 2018, the NGT it has disposed of more than 700 cases only based and only directing the authorities to look into the matter. Further, it also dismisses large amount of cases only on procedural grounds. Also, that I've highlighted that the jurisdiction of this NGT it is currently limited because it cannot deal with the issues related to Wildlife Protection Act of the year 1972 as well as recognition of Forest Right Act of the year 2006. Hence, you can see that these are important laws for environmental application. And when NGT it is not able to deal with issues related to these laws, it makes the jurisdiction of the NGT much more limited. Further, this NGT and its orders, it is seen by the large section of the society as an obstruction to development. Hence, NGT it also leads to obstacle of development. Now let us move to what should be the way forward in order to make this NGT much more effective in nature. First of all, there is a need to amend the National Green Tribunal Act of the year 2010, and it can be given through this amendment. This NGT it can be given more powers, especially with relation to make its orders enforceable in nature. Further, the jurisdiction of NGT Act, especially with relation to Wildlife Protection Act as well as Forest Rights Act, it can be enlarged in the by this amendment. Further, NGT should also focus on increasing disposal of environmental related cases. For example, the vacancies of both judges as well as experts, it needs to be filled at the earliest possible time. Further, currently the appeal towards the NGT judgments, it is only there for Supreme Court. Hence, it is more important to make this appeal through a appellate body rather than to higher judiciary themselves. Further, the Supreme Court, it should reduce its special leave petition when when it comes to matters related to environmental pollution, because it encroaches upon the special responsibility that is given to the National Green Tribunal. As members of this National Green Tribunal, they are more inclined towards dealing with environmental matters. Hence, when Supreme Court it reduces its special leave petitions, it can increase or highlight the increasingly important role of the National Green Tribunal itself. Further, this National Green Tribunal it should also establish more regional benches, because increasing the amount of regional benches it will make the National Green Tribunal more approachable towards the other people. Hence, they'll not have to travel to important location in case they feel aggravated of their environmental misuse. Therefore, amending the National Green Tribunal Act to give it more power as well as enlarge its jurisdiction and increase focus on disposable of cases, especially with relation to increased vacancies, reducing its appeal towards Supreme Court, reducing the amount of special leave petition by Supreme Court, and increasing the amount of regional benches are an effective way forward if we want to improve the functioning of National Green Tribunal. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on National Green Tribunal, and the students who are coming up with their comments, they can quickly ask me their comments in the comment section below. Yes, Yuvraj, you're correct that there was National Commission to review the working of the Constitution that suggested that the amount of sittings that should be there for the Parliament it should increase in an effective manner. Now there are no questions right now. You can ask me the questions in the comment section below, and our team will try to address your queries at the earliest possible time. With this, I'll see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Until then, I bid you a good night.